I went into the woods that afternoon to clear my mind after sitting in my room for too many hours. I wasn't planning anything serious, just a long walk through a quiet place where I could breathe a little. I picked a random route on the map, something I had never tried before. The trail wasn't famous or busy, and that was exactly why I chose it. I wanted silence. I wanted empty space. I wanted a break from everything. The entrance to the trail looked harmless enough. A narrow dirt line slid between tall trees that blocked most of the sunlight. The air smelled damp and fresh, and the sound of my boots pressing into the soft ground echoed a little. It felt peaceful at first, the kind of quiet that makes your whole body relax. I walked slowly at the start, trying to enjoy it, but the deeper I went, the more the woods changed around me. The trees grew closer together, the light grew dimmer, and the air felt heavier. I noticed the ground changing too. The dirt shifted into a mixture of old pine needles, soft mud, and roots that twisted like ropes under the soil. I had to watch my steps more carefully. Every now and then, I kicked a rock or stepped into a patch of wet ground that sank a little under my weight. I checked the map on my phone once, maybe twice, just to make sure I was still on the right trail. It showed the same line and the same direction, so I kept going. But after another 20 or 30 minutes, the first strange detail hit me. I saw a small pile of stones stacked carefully beside the trail. It didn't look like something the wind created or an animal knocked over. It was too neat, too intentional. 3 stones forming a small tower. It didn't bother me too much, but it felt out of place in an area where barely anyone came. I passed it and the trail grew narrower. Branches reached across the path and brushed my arms. The ground felt softer again. Then I saw another pile of stones, this time closer to the trail, almost placed right at the edge where my foot nearly kicked it. Same size, same shape, same style. 3 stones stacked. I paused and looked at it. The stones weren't clean. They were covered in wet dirt, like someone had pulled them from the ground just recently. I kept moving, but now the quiet felt different. It wasn't peaceful anymore. It was the type of quiet that made the hairs on your arms stand up. I listened for any sound. Birds, wind, animals, but everything was too still. The air felt thick, like the trees were swallowing every sound before it reached me. As I walked deeper, I noticed more stone piles. Some small, some larger, all placed in strange spots, beside fallen logs, near tree roots, even in the middle of the trail like someone wanted me to see them. The way they lined up made me feel like I was being guided somewhere without my permission. Each one seemed freshly built. The dirt on them was still loose. Some stones still had moisture on them like they were handled with wet hands. My breathing got louder in my chest. I could hear my heartbeat more clearly. I pulled my backpack strap tighter across my shoulder and picked up my pace. I thought maybe some nature lover made them to mark the trail. But that didn't fully make sense because the stones weren't even on the same side. They were scattered in a pattern that didn't follow a straight line. Some were far off the trail, some close, some in places that didn't look logical at all. The trail eventually curved into a darker section of the woods where thick branches blocked almost all the sunlight. The ground felt colder. The mud had turned into a dark, wet layer that stuck to the bottom of my boots. I kept walking, but every step felt like I was sinking a little deeper into something I shouldn't be in. The trees leaned in on me from both sides, and the shadows stretched across the ground like long fingers. As I rounded a bend, I noticed the strangest pile of stones yet. 5 piled together with a thin branch stuck upright through the top one. It looked like a marker, but not the kind hikers used. Something about it felt wrong immediately. I had an urge to turn around right then, but I convinced myself not to panic. I stepped around it, careful not to touch anything. My stomach felt tight, and the cold from the ground seemed to crawl up my legs. I kept listening, hoping for any normal sound. Wind, water, birds, but nothing came. Then I saw footprints. Not mine, these were larger and deeper. They crossed the trail ahead and disappeared into the trees on the right side. The mud around them was fresh. Someone had walked through recently. The tracks were spaced far apart, like the person was moving fast. My mouth went dry as I stared at them. They didn't look like the kind of steps someone makes during a calm, normal walk. They looked urgent. I moved past them quickly, trying to focus on the trail, but my heartbeat felt heavier with every step. My palms were sweating inside my gloves. I kept glancing into the trees even though I didn't want to see anything. The woods looked the same in every direction. Dense, dark, silent. But the silence didn't feel empty anymore. It felt full, like something was standing still somewhere between the trees. I reached another stone pile, a big one this time, and something about it made me stop completely. The stones formed a rough circle, leaving a small empty space in the middle. Right in that space, half buried in the mud, was a piece of fabric. Dark green, torn, stuck under a rock like someone had stepped on it. I crouched and stared at it but didn't touch it. The mud around it was too fresh, and the edges of the fabric were frayed like it had been yanked or ripped. Something about the way it was positioned looked unplanned, almost like someone dropped it while moving quickly. A cold sweat spread across my back. The woods suddenly felt smaller around me. My body stiffened, and a heavy feeling settled in my stomach. I stood up slowly, trying not to make any sudden movements. I looked down the trail, then behind me. Everything looked normal, but nothing felt normal anymore. I knew at that moment I needed to get out. I turned and started walking back the way I came, but I kept my pace steady because running felt like it would only make things worse. The trail behind me stretched long and narrow, with shadows growing taller as the sun dipped somewhere behind the clouds. My ears picked up every tiny sound. The slightest shift in the trees made my chest tighten. As I moved, I noticed something that made me walk even faster. Some of the stone piles I had seen earlier were different now. A few looked like they had been knocked over. One was moved slightly to the side. Another one had an extra stone added to it. I didn't stop to examine them closely. I just kept moving, heart pounding so hard it felt like it was shaking my ribs. My steps became faster, and the trail began to look unfamiliar even though I knew I was going the right way. The forest felt more twisted, like the shapes of the trees had changed while I was deeper in. The light above me dimmed even more, and the air felt thicker, almost hard to breathe. At one point, I passed a section of the trail I remembered clearly, a fallen log covered in moss, but now there were fresh footprints beside it. Large ones, deep ones. They weren't there earlier. They followed the same path I was taking. Someone had been behind me, walking where I walked, not long after I passed. I felt a cold shock run through my whole body. I didn't stop again. I didn't look back. I just kept moving, holding my breath in long, shaky pulls. The silence felt like it was pressing against my ears. Every time I brushed against a branch, I almost flinched. Finally, after what felt like a full hour of tension, I saw the lighter part of the forest through the trees, the entrance area where the woods opened up slightly. When I stepped into that space, the air felt different, lighter, less suffocating. I kept walking until I reached the road, and only then did I let my legs slow down. I got into my car with shaking hands and locked the doors immediately. My breathing was uneven and fast, and I couldn't stop scanning the tree line. Nothing moved, but the feeling that something was hidden in there stayed with me long after I drove away. When I got home, I checked the map again. The random route I chose earlier wasn't heavily used. Hardly anyone went there, and that hit me harder than anything else. Someone else was there. Someone who moved through the woods silently. Someone who built those stone piles. Someone who walked behind me at some point without making a sound. Someone who left fresh footprints where mine had already been. Nothing supernatural, nothing impossible. Just a person. A real human being who knew those woods far better than I did. And whoever they were, they weren't out there for a peaceful walk. They were watching paths, leaving signs, following steps. And on that random day, by pure bad luck, I stepped onto the same path they were already walking. I never planned to stay in the woods that late, but sometimes things go wrong slowly, step by step, and before you realize it, you're in a place you shouldn't be. It happened to me last autumn when I went out to explore a section of forest I hadn't been in before. I'd looked at the map the night before and thought it would be a simple day hike, nothing complicated. The weather was cool, the air dry, and the trail at first felt clear and easy to follow. I brought a backpack with water, a snack, and a light jacket. I didn't expect danger. I didn't expect anything unusual at all. The first few hours were normal. The woods were quiet and calm, just the usual sound of wind moving through the branches and the soft crunch of leaves under my boots. The trees were tall and straight in the first part of the hike, spaced out enough for the sunlight to cut through them in long strips. As I walked deeper, the ground started sloping downward, and the trees grew closer together. The air got cooler. I kept going, trying to memorize landmarks, telling myself I'd turn back once I reached the old fire road shown on the map. But the fire road wasn't where it was supposed to be. Or maybe I simply passed it without noticing. The forest floor dropped even more and twisted into uneven ground. Sometimes I had to step over fallen branches thick with moss. Other times I had to push through clusters of narrow trees pressed tightly together like ribs. Every few minutes, the light dimmed more as the canopy grew thicker overhead. My phone couldn't get a signal, but at that point I still felt calm. I wasn't lost yet. I just needed to head back uphill. I turned around and started walking the direction I thought I came from. But the woods didn't look the same anymore. The path I thought I had followed earlier looked like nothing more than random patches of flattened leaves. Trees that I could have sworn I recognized looked identical to others nearby. The more I tried to find something familiar, the clearer it became that I wasn't heading out. I was drifting deeper. My breathing started tightening in my chest, but I kept going, pushing through branches that scraped against my jacket. I tried keeping a straight line by choosing a visual target and walking toward it, but the forest kept twisting, pulling me off course with uneven ground and thick brush. After about half an hour, I realized I had no idea where I was. The sun was still above the trees, but it was definitely dropping faster than I wanted it to. That was when I heard the first sound. A soft, quick snap of a twig somewhere behind me. It wasn't the sound of a squirrel or a bird hopping across a branch. It sounded like a step, light but controlled. I stopped for a moment, listening. The woods went quiet again. Too quiet. Normally, even deep in the forest, you hear something. Wind, insects, the distant rustle of something moving. But everything around me felt still, as if the entire forest was holding its breath. I kept walking a little faster now. The silence felt heavier with each step I took. After a while, I heard another noise, this time a slow drag across the leaves, farther behind me. My skin crawled instantly, and I could feel a cold wave crawl down my back. I tried to convince myself it was just a deer, maybe walking cautiously after hearing me move. But something about the rhythm didn't match an animal. It was too steady. I didn't look back that time. I didn't want to. Instead, I focused on getting uphill. My boots dug into the soft earth as I climbed a small rise. When I reached the top, I paused again, trying to catch my breath without making too much noise. The air felt colder. The shadows around me stretched across the ground in long shapes that made it harder to judge where the actual path was. The sun was sinking behind the ridge, leaving the forest dim and colorless. When I finally forced myself to glance behind me, I saw nothing at first, just trees, branches, and more trees. But the silence was wrong. It felt tense, like something was waiting. I couldn't shake that feeling, so I moved again, this time practically jogging, stepping over roots and ducking under low branches. My backpack thumped against my shoulders with each step, and my breathing got louder no matter how hard I tried to quiet it. At one point, I slipped on a patch of wet leaves and fell hard onto my side. The impact knocked the wind out of me. I lay there for a few seconds, trying to pull in a breath, staring up at the darkening canopy. My ribs hurt. My elbow throbbed from hitting a root. But what scared me more was the sound I heard while lying there. Another faint step, closer than the earlier ones. Slow, careful, heavy enough to crush dry leaves. I forced myself up and kept moving, even though my legs shook under me. I didn't want to imagine what was behind me or how long it had been following. I didn't understand why it kept its distance, but the fact that it didn't rush toward me was somehow worse. It felt like something was studying me, matching my movements without trying to catch up yet. The woods grew darker, and soon I could barely see more than a short distance around me. The cold seemed to bite deeper into my skin. I knew I had to find some kind of landmark, anything human-made. A trail marker, a fence, a fire pit, a split in the tree line. But every direction looked the same. Endless rows of trees, all bending toward the darkness. As I pushed forward, I found myself stepping onto an area where the ground flattened out a bit more. The soil was softer, almost muddy, and that was when I saw something that froze me completely. Footprints. Fresh ones. Deep ones. They weren't mine. They were larger, spaced farther apart, and they led forward in a straight line. I followed them cautiously with my eyes, realizing they disappeared into the thicker part of the woods where the shadows were the deepest. My heart hammered against my ribs. Someone had been here recently. Someone moving fast. Someone heavy. I slowly looked behind me again, scanning the darker parts of the forest. Nothing moved. Nothing shifted. But something in me knew those prints didn't belong to a hiker heading home. They looked rushed, uneven, almost like the person had been running for a while. The air felt colder as I followed the terrain downhill. I didn't want to follow those footprints, but I didn't know where else to go. The forest was growing darker with every passing minute, and I knew I had maybe an hour before complete darkness. I kept going, hoping the person who made the prints had been running towards something safe and not away from something dangerous. The fear kept eating at my thoughts as I moved faster. My chest felt tight. My hands shook. Every step felt like it mattered, like each mistake could lead me deeper into trouble. I tried listening for any streams or rivers, anything that could guide me out, but all I heard was my own breathing and the quiet shifting of the forest around me. Then the ground began to slope again, and soon I heard a faint, distant rushing sound, water. Relief washed through me. Water meant a creek, and creeks often led to small bridges or trail crossings. I hurried toward it, stumbling over uneven ground in my rush. When I reached the creek, the sound of water filled the silence, making the woods feel less suffocating. I followed the bank downstream until I spotted something in the fading light. A wooden footbridge stretching across the water. It looked old but sturdy, and more importantly, it meant I was near a real trail. When I stepped onto the bridge, I felt a wave of relief move through me so strong it almost made my legs buckle. My breathing slowed a little. The sky beyond the trees was darker now, but still carried enough color to guide me. I followed the trail until I reached the main path. And when I finally saw the small sign pointing toward the parking area, I don't think I've ever felt more grateful for anything. I walked until the forest thinned, and when I saw my car sitting alone in the dim lot, a deep chill ran through me. I had never been so happy to see something familiar. As I unlocked the door, I turned back one last time, scanning the tree line. The woods looked still, quiet, empty, but I couldn't shake the memory of those footsteps or the fresh tracks I found. And the part that has stayed with me ever since that day is simple. Whatever was following me never revealed itself, never rushed me, never made a mistake loud enough for me to catch it clearly. It stayed just out of sight, matching my pace like it had done this before. I still don't know what I escaped that day, but I know for certain I wasn't alone in those woods. I went into the woods that morning thinking it would be just another long hike, something to clear my head after a stressful week. The air was cold enough to sting my nose, and the ground still held the dampness from last night's rain. Everything felt quiet in a heavy way, like the trees were pressing in on the trail and keeping all the sound for themselves. I followed a path I had used many times before, a narrow dirt line cutting through thick pine and tall grass, but that day it felt different, like something about it shifted while I wasn't looking. I carried a small backpack with water, a first aid kit, a knife, and a snack I probably wouldn't even touch. The trail was soft from the rain, and my boots left clear footprints. I liked seeing them when I turned back sometimes, because they reminded me where I came from and how far I had gone. But after about an hour of walking, I noticed something strange. There were other footprints on the trail, but they didn't look fresh. They looked old, but not old enough to be washed away by the rain. They were light, uneven, and continued in the same direction as mine. First, I didn't think much of it. Lots of people used this area, but the deeper I went, the more the footprints bothered me. They stayed in the center of the trail like the person didn't care about mud or puddles. The steps dragged in places, as if the person was tired or pulling something. I kept telling myself it was nothing, but the longer I looked at them, the more odd they seemed. They never turned off, never stopped, never overlapped like the person slowed down or changed pace. The trail got rougher the deeper I went. Thick roots broke the ground, wet moss covered fallen trees, and the smell of soaked pine needles filled the air. I kept moving, but I felt my shoulders getting tense. Every small snap from the branches made me turn my head. My breathing got louder inside my hood, and I kept adjusting my backpack strap just to distract myself. After another 30 minutes, I saw something that made me stop. A broken branch hung across the trail, but it wasn't broken from the storm. It looked like someone had snapped it intentionally. The break was clean and fresh. The sap still glistened. I stared at it, feeling a pressure in my chest I didn't want to admit was fear. I stepped over it and kept walking, but I could feel my heartbeat steady and heavy. The footprints ahead got deeper, like the person had started walking faster or carrying more weight. In one spot, the prints were so deep I could see water gathering inside them. I crouched down to look closer, and the smell of wet soil filled my nose. I didn't know why I was studying them so closely, but something about them didn't look right. The weight in the prints looked uneven, like one leg was injured or weaker than the other. I stood up and wiped my hands on my pants. The air felt colder. I zipped my jacket all the way up and started moving again, but my pace was slower now. I kept scanning the trees on both sides of the trail, searching for movement. The woods were thick, and the deeper I went, the less sunlight reached the ground. The shadows between the trees felt darker than usual. After a while, the trail became harder to follow. Fallen branches and rocks made it twist, and I had to climb over things more often. The footprints ahead started looking messy, almost panicked. Some were sideways, some were dug too deep like the person slipped. I felt a tightening in my stomach as I kept following them. I wasn't even sure why I kept going. Maybe curiosity, maybe stubbornness, or maybe something in me couldn't let go until I knew what was happening. Then I reached the part of the woods where the trail split into two thin paths. This was where I usually turned back, because the right path went toward a small hill and the left one led deeper into the forest where the trees grew thick like walls. The footprints continued down the left path. I hesitated for a moment, standing there with the cold air cutting through my clothes. Everything in me said this was the point I should turn around, but I felt pulled forward by something I couldn't explain. I stepped onto the left path, moving slower and listening to everything. Not long after that, I noticed another sign someone had passed through. The bark on a tree was scraped off at shoulder height, like something sharp had been dragged across it. A fresh scrape. The wood underneath was bright, almost white. The tree wasn't broken by the storm or animals. Someone did it by hand. I kept walking, and the woods began to shift around me. The ground got softer and more uneven. The smell of mud grew stronger, and the trees leaned in closer to one another, blocking most of the daylight. It felt like stepping into a place that didn't want visitors. Then I found something hanging from a branch. A piece of cloth torn and soaked from the rain. It was stuck on a sharp piece of wood like someone had brushed against it while running. I picked it up with 2 fingers. It was thin, possibly from a jacket. The edges were torn, not cut. The fabric felt cold and heavy. My mouth felt dry. I put the piece of cloth into my pocket and kept walking, but everything inside me felt wrong. The footprints ahead became wild. Some went off the trail, some circled back, some ended in long drag marks like the person fell and crawled a few steps. My brain kept trying to find normal explanations. Maybe a hiker got hurt or lost, but everything about the prints looked desperate. Soon I reached a small open area where the trees parted just enough to let some light through. The ground there looked disturbed. Leaves were scattered, the soil was overturned, and deep footprints covered the entire area. I walked slowly across it, scanning the ground, and then I saw something that made my skin crawl. There were 2 sets of footprints now. One set was the uneven ones I had been following, and next to them was a second set, larger, heavier, deeper. They overlapped in places, almost like someone had been following the first person closely, matching their steps. My hands felt cold inside my gloves. I turned around slowly and looked back down the path I came from. The trail behind me was empty and silent, but I couldn't get rid of the feeling that someone had been walking behind me too. The hairs on my neck stood up. I grabbed my backpack straps and tightened them, trying to keep my breathing steady. I knew I needed to leave. The longer I stayed, the more danger I felt building around me. I turned and started walking back the way I came, moving fast but trying not to run. Running in woods like these was dangerous. One wrong step could snap an ankle. Every sound felt sharper now. Every rustle in the bushes made my heart jump. I kept imagining someone stepping quietly behind me, matching my pace, watching me without making a sound. I didn't want to look back, but my fear kept growing with every step. Finally, after what felt like forever, I forced myself to turn around and look. There was nothing, just trees, shadows, and the narrow path. But the silence felt different now. Heavy, alert. I kept moving. My legs felt tighter, and I could feel sweat running down my back even though the air was freezing. I stepped carefully over the fallen branches and rocks, trying to remember exactly where I had walked before. I didn't want to get lost, not when something felt so wrong. It took longer to get back than I expected. The forest seemed different, like the shapes of the trees had changed while I was gone. The path felt narrower, and the shadows seemed deeper. I kept checking behind me every few minutes, but I never saw anything. Still, the feeling of being watched clung to me all the way. When I finally reached the familiar part of the trail where the footprints had first appeared, I felt a small wave of relief. But that relief disappeared instantly when I looked at the ground. My footprints from earlier were still there, but now, next to them was that second larger set. They followed my prints exactly, step for step, all the way back. Someone had been walking behind me, matching my pace perfectly, staying silent the entire time. I stood there staring at the prints, feeling my stomach twist. The deeper set of prints continued forward, leading the same direction I was now heading. They weren't old. They were fresh. Too fresh. The person wasn't ahead of me or behind me anymore. They were somewhere in the trees, watching, waiting. I didn't stop after that. I moved as fast as I could without breaking into a full run, because running would only make noise and attract attention. The trail finally opened up near the entrance where the trees became thinner and the sunlight brighter. When I saw the dirt road through the trees, my body felt lighter, but the fear didn't leave. Only when I reached my car and locked the doors did I let myself breathe properly. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely put the keys into the ignition. I drove away fast, checking the mirror every few seconds, half expecting to see someone step out of the tree line. The piece of cloth I found is still in my backpack. I don't know why I kept it. Maybe to remind myself that what I saw was real, that the footprints were real, that someone was out there, moving silently through the woods, close enough to walk in my steps without ever making a sound. I haven't gone back since, and I won't, because I know that if I return, I won't be the one doing the following. This time, I'd be the one being followed from the moment I step into the trees. I went into the woods that morning thinking it would be an easy day. I had been planning the hike for almost 2 weeks. The trail was in a part of the state I had never been to before, a big spread of forest with long valleys, quiet creeks, and old hills covered in thick trees. Most people didn't go out there because it wasn't a tourist area. There were barely any signs, barely any parking spots, and the roads that led to the trailhead were rough and narrow. That was exactly why I chose it. I wanted the kind of place where I wouldn't see another person for hours. The morning air felt sharp when I stepped out of my car. You could smell wet leaves and cold dirt, that strong earthy smell that always shows up after a night of rain. The ground was soft, my boots sinking into the mud with each step. I checked my pack, tightened my straps, and headed down the trail. It was a long loop that cut through the woods and circled around a ridge before linking back to the start. The first hour felt peaceful. The trees around me were tall and thin, their branches bare except for a few orange leaves that hadn't fallen yet. The forest floor was covered in thick layers of wet leaves, and every step made a soft crunching sound. My breath came out as small white clouds. The woods felt empty in a calm way, not in a creepy way. I kept a steady pace, enjoying the silence. After a while, I reached a part of the trail where everything looked the same. The trees stood so close together that the sky barely showed through. The ground dipped down gently, and the air felt colder. That's when I saw the first strange thing. A long line of footprints crossing the trail. They weren't old. The edges were sharp, not washed out by rain. They came from deep in the forest and continued across the trail to the other side, cutting through the woods as if the person wasn't following any trail at all. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe a hunter or someone scouting the area, but it still made me more alert. I kept walking, paying more attention to the ground now, scanning for any other signs of someone being out there. About 20 minutes later, I saw something else. A small circle of stones placed carefully in the middle of the trail. At first I thought it might be natural, but the stones were too evenly shaped and stacked. They weren't scattered. They were arranged. I stepped around them and kept moving, but the sight of it stuck to me like a warning I didn't understand yet. The trail began to narrow as I got deeper into the woods. The trees leaned in closer, branches hanging lower, and the ground became uneven with roots everywhere. Every few minutes, I thought I heard something behind me, soft steps or leaves shifting. But when I stopped and listened, the forest went silent again, completely still. No birds, no wind, no rustling. I tried to shake the feeling off. I walked faster, hoping the trail would open up again. But instead I reached a flat area where the forest suddenly felt different. The ground was covered in a thicker layer of leaves, and the air smelled stronger, like wet wood and moss. The light was lower, even though it wasn't near sunset yet. Then I saw a tree with markings on it. Long vertical scratches low on the trunk. They didn't look like animal marks. They were too straight, too clean, almost like someone had used a tool. I stared at them for a moment, trying to understand why they bothered me so much. Something about them felt off, too intentional, too fresh. I moved on quickly, my heartbeat picking up a little. I kept checking behind me even though I tried to tell myself I was being paranoid. But that uneasy pressure in my chest kept growing. Eventually I reached a part of the trail where the ground sloped upward. The climb wasn't steep, but the mud made it slow. I took careful steps, grabbing onto tree roots for balance. When I reached the top, I paused to catch my breath. That's when I noticed a break in the trees on my right. Clearing. It wasn't large, maybe the size of a small bedroom, but the trees around it were spaced apart in a way that didn't look natural. The ground inside the clearing wasn't covered in leaves like the rest of the forest. It was mostly bare dirt, smoothed out like someone had come through and cleared it. And right in the middle was something that made the hairs on my neck slowly lift. A single old backpack. It was dirty, the fabric torn, the straps half buried in mud. The color was faded, but it looked out of place, like it hadn't been touched in a long time but also somehow hadn't been there long enough to fully blend in. I didn't move closer. I didn't want to. Something about that empty clearing felt wrong, like I was seeing something I wasn't supposed to see. I turned away from it and kept going, faster now. As I walked, the forest grew darker even though the sky wasn't supposed to dim yet. Maybe the clouds were rolling in, or maybe the trees were just getting thicker. Either way, everything felt heavier. Every sound behind me felt closer. Every shadow seemed deeper. Then I started noticing new footprints on the trail. They were fresher than the ones I had seen earlier. Deep heel marks, mud still moist inside the tread. They were heading in the same direction I was going, not across the trail on it. Someone had walked ahead of me recently. I followed them for a long time, longer than I wanted to. The sight of them made my stomach twist, because it meant that someone was there, somewhere ahead of me, walking the same path, moving slowly enough that their prints looked like they were made only minutes ago. I didn't want to catch up to whoever it was. I didn't want to think about who would be so deep in these woods alone, not following any marked trails earlier, leaving strange scratches and stone markers and abandoned backpacks in clearings where no one should be. My legs started to shake a little as I kept going. The silence pressed harder against my ears. I wished for the sound of a bird or even a branch cracking naturally, something normal, something alive. But the forest stayed silent, like it was waiting. Eventually, the trail dipped down sharply, and the land around me changed again. The ground felt softer, wetter, almost marshy. My boots made sucking sounds when I stepped. The trees grew thicker, their branches crossing overhead like a tangled roof blocking out the fading light. Then I saw something that made my whole spine go cold. A second set of footprints appeared beside the first ones. Smaller, lighter, and the stride between them was uneven, like whoever had made them kept stopping and starting. They both led forward, and both sets were fresh. I didn't want to think about the idea that there were two people out there now. Two people walking just ahead of me, moving slowly, leaving marks, maybe even listening. I sped up, almost jogging now, trying to breathe quietly even though my lungs felt tight. I wanted out. I didn't care about finishing the loop anymore. I just wanted to reach the trailhead. I kept moving until my legs burned, until sweat mixed with the cold air and made my skin feel numb. Then the trail forked. Shouldn't have. The map didn't show any fork. The loop was supposed to be one path that wrapped around and brought me back. But there it was, one trail splitting into two, both narrow, both covered in footprints that were too blurred to follow clearly. My chest tightened. My breathing came in shallow bursts. I stood there fighting the panic rising inside me, trying to choose one, knowing that picking wrong could take me deeper into the woods instead of out. I chose the left one because it seemed slightly more open. I walked fast, faster than before, my muscles burning, my clothes cold and damp. Every shadow felt like it moved. Every tree trunk looked like a figure standing still. The air felt like it was closing in around me. After what felt like forever, I saw something familiar through the trees, a rusted trail marker on an old post. My heart jumped hard in my chest. I pushed through the mud and dead branches until I reached it, pointed toward the main loop trail. I followed it like my life depended on it. The forest slowly opened up. I recognized a bend in the trail, then a fallen log I remembered stepping over earlier in the day. The sky above finally showed through the trees again, pale and fading. My breathing loosened just a little. When I saw the trailhead through the trees, my legs almost gave out. My car sat alone, exactly where I had left it, looking like the only safe thing in the world. I didn't stop walking. I didn't look around. I reached my car, unlocked it with shaking hands, got inside, and locked the doors. Only then did I let myself breathe fully. I drove away quickly, my hands stiff on the wheel, my heart still beating fast. I didn't slow down until the woods were far behind me, and even then my mind kept replaying everything I had seen. The footprints, the stones, the scratched tree, the strange clearing, the fork in the trail that wasn't supposed to exist. I don't know who was out there. I don't know why there were two sets of footprints, or why someone would place stone markers or drag things across trails, or why that backpack was sitting alone in that clearing. And I don't want to know. Sometimes the scariest things are the ones that stay unanswered, the ones that don't need anything supernatural to be terrifying. All I know is that I got out because I moved when the fear started building instead of freezing. If I had waited longer at that fork, or if I had picked the other path, or if darkness had come 10 minutes earlier, I don't think I would have walked out of those woods. And that thought stays with me every time I see a tree line now. I never liked hiking alone at night, but that evening I didn't really have a choice. I had gone deeper into the forest than I planned, and by the time I realized how far I'd wandered, the daylight was already thinning out. I had gone out to clear my head after a rough week, telling myself I'd follow the loop trail and be back before sunset. But somewhere along the way, I missed a turn. The trail markers stopped looking familiar, the ground started sloping in ways I didn't recognize, and by the time I checked my phone, the battery was almost gone. I tried saving whatever power I had left for the flashlight, but the screen died minutes later anyway. The woods around me were already sinking into that heavy evening silence. It's a different kind of quiet from anything in normal life. No engine noise, no distant voices, just the faint rustle of leaves and the snapping of small branches somewhere far off. The air felt colder than it should for that time of year, and each breath I took came out tight and sharp. I kept walking, telling myself I'd eventually cross the main trail again if I stayed in one direction. But the forest didn't work like that. The trees twisted and crowded together in ways that made everything look the same. My boots scraped over roots and wet soil. Every few minutes I had to step over fallen logs or push through thick shrubs that grabbed at my clothes. My hands were scratched up within an hour. My legs were starting to burn, and sweat kept running down my back even though the air was getting colder. I tried calming myself down by focusing on small details. How the ground felt under my feet, how far the trees spread, how the air smelled of wet bark and moss. But nothing stopped the slow, growing sense that I was walking deeper into the middle of nowhere. The first real hit of fear came when I noticed the woods were getting too quiet. No birds, no insects, nothing moving except me. Even the wind felt like it had stopped somewhere above the tree line. It was the kind of silence that makes your own heartbeat feel loud. I didn't like that at all, so I kept moving, speeding up even though my legs were tired. After some time, maybe an hour, maybe more, I finally reached a small open patch. Not a meadow, just a break in the trees where the ground was flatter and softer. At first I felt relieved, like maybe I was getting closer to a trail. But something felt off about that clearing right away. The ground was disturbed. The soil looked pressed down in irregular shapes. It didn't look like an animal bedding area, and it didn't look like campsite footprints either. The patterns didn't make sense. They looked like someone had been dragging something heavy across the dirt, circling around the same area again and again. I tried ignoring it, but I couldn't stop examining the marks. Some were shallow, some deep, some crossed over each other in a messy pattern. The more I looked, the more uncomfortable it made me feel. I forced myself to keep walking, pushing deeper into the trees to get away from the clearing. The sun had fully dropped by then. The forest turned into uneven shapes and moving shadows. I could barely see a few feet ahead of me, relying on the dim light leaking through the canopy. My breathing got heavier and I kept wiping my hands on my pants because they felt sweaty and shaky. That's when I heard it. A sharp crack behind me. Not a small twig, something bigger. Something with weight. I froze. My whole body locked in place, and all I could hear was my heartbeat pounding against my chest. I didn't turn around right away. I waited, listening to the darkness behind me. The woods stayed quiet for a few seconds, and part of me wanted to believe it was just a branch falling on its own. But then I heard another sound. This time a slow, deliberate crunch of leaves. It wasn't the pattern of an animal. It was spaced out, steady, controlled, like footsteps. I finally turned around, but I couldn't see anything clearly. Just rows of trees and thick shadows. My eyes kept darting from one dark shape to another. Every trunk looked like someone standing. Every shadow looked like something moving. I forced myself to start walking again. Faster this time, almost speed walking through the woods. My arms stayed tight at my sides, and I kept glancing back. Every few minutes I heard something again. A faint step, a soft shift of weight, something brushing against branches. The sounds didn't follow a straight line. They seemed to come from different angles, like whoever or whatever was out there was keeping its distance but staying close enough to track me. My throat felt dry, and my chest ached from how fast I was breathing. My legs started trembling from the constant pace, but I didn't dare slow down. The fear kept building, stacking on top of itself until it made everything around me feel unreal, like I was wrapped inside a nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. After what felt like forever, I saw something through the trees, a faint beam of white light, shaky and thin. For a second I thought it was a star, but it moved too much. It looked like a small flashlight beam sweeping across the ground. My whole body lit up with adrenaline. I didn't care who it belonged to or what it was. I just ran toward it, pushing through bushes and tripping over logs. When I got closer, I realized the light wasn't moving toward me. It was moving away, like someone walking in the opposite direction. I kept following it until I realized something strange. The beam was too low to the ground. It didn't look like someone holding a flashlight. It looked like it was lying on the forest floor, rolling slightly as if it had been dropped. I reached it and crouched down. It was a small camping flashlight, still faintly glowing. The metal casing was scratched and smeared with dirt. The light flickered every few seconds, like the battery was almost dead. The moment I picked it up, I noticed fresh footprints around it. They were clear, deep, and spaced widely apart, like someone had been running. The footprints led deeper into the woods, disappearing into the darkness. I stood there shaking, holding the dying flashlight, realizing I had two choices: follow the footprints and hope they led to someone alive, or turn away and try to find my own way out. I chose the second option. I wasn't in any shape to follow whoever left those tracks. I felt watched, hunted, and I didn't want to know what they were running from. I forced myself to walk in a straight line, using the weak flashlight to guide me. I followed the slope of the land, trying to keep to downhill sections. Usually, downhill meant water and water meant trails. My boots dug into the soft earth, and every noise behind me made my heart jump. It took a long time, maybe hours, before I finally heard something familiar: the distant sound of rushing water. It was faint, but it was enough to keep me moving. When I reached the stream, the relief almost made my knees buckle. I followed it downstream until I saw the wooden bridge that crossed near the main hiking trail. I had never been so relieved in my life to see a man-made structure. The moment I stepped onto that bridge, I felt the tension in my body finally release. My muscles ached. My head throbbed. My palms were sore from gripping the flashlight too tightly. I didn't stop walking until I reached the parking area, and when I finally saw my car, I felt tears sting my eyes. My hands were shaking so badly that it took me 3 tries to get the key into the ignition. When I drove away, I kept checking the rearview mirror every few seconds, expecting to see someone step out of the tree line. But the woods stayed still and dark behind me. Later, when I got home and finally calmed down enough to think clearly, I looked at the flashlight again. There was a number scratched into the side. A phone number. I tried calling it, but the line was dead. No ring. No message. Nothing. I still don't know who dropped that flashlight or what they were running from. I don't know who was following me either. I never went back to that forest. And I don't plan to, because every time I think about that night, I keep imagining what would have happened if the footsteps behind me had finally decided to get closer. And the part that still keeps me awake sometimes is how long whoever it was managed to follow me without ever making a single mistake, without ever getting too close, without ever letting me see them. Like they had done it before, like they were practiced, like they were waiting for the right moment. I'm just glad I didn't give them one. I wasn't supposed to be alone that day. The plan was simple: meet a friend at a small trailhead after work, hike a loop that wasn't too long, and get back before dark. But he canceled at the last minute, and I told myself I'd still go. I had been stressed for weeks, and the idea of walking through the woods in the cool evening felt like the only thing that would clear my head. I convinced myself there was nothing to worry about. I'd hiked alone hundreds of times. This would be no different. The woods were quiet as soon as I stepped onto the trail. That kind of quiet that makes you hear your own breathing a little too loudly. The trees were tall and thin at first, spaced out enough to see far between them, and the late sun painted everything in a warm orange color. The air smelled like damp dirt and pine. I remember feeling good for the first 20 minutes, like I finally had space to breathe. My legs felt steady, and the ground under my boots was solid. Nothing felt strange or threatening. The trail slowly curved toward a darker part of the forest where the trees grew closer together. Their branches blocked out more of the sky, and the light turned dimmer. I noticed how the air cooled down as I walked deeper. The dirt gave way to soft leaves that muffled my steps. That feeling of peace slowly faded and turned into something tighter in my chest. Something I ignored because I didn't want to admit I felt it. After 30 or 40 minutes, I reached a fork I didn't remember seeing on the map. The sign was old and worn, and the wooden arrow pointing right looked newer than the one pointing left. I stood there for a few seconds, trying to guess which direction connected back to the loop. I chose the left path, telling myself that older meant original. That choice, one small guess, changed everything. The trail narrowed almost immediately. The trees crowded around me so tightly that the sunlight barely reached the ground. The air felt heavier, colder. I kept walking, thinking the trail would widen again, but instead it twisted sharply downhill into a part of the forest I had never seen. The ground was uneven, filled with bumps and roots hidden under soggy leaves. My steps grew slower as I tried not to slip. It was so quiet that the sound of me brushing against branches felt too loud. The first strange thing I noticed was the smell. something sharp like metal and damp soil mixed together. I didn't know what could produce that scent out here. It didn't smell like an animal or a dead tree. It was more like cold iron, almost like blood, but not exactly the same. I tried to ignore it, blaming my imagination, but the deeper I walked, the stronger it got. Then I heard something. It was faint, but enough to make the hair on my arms rise. A soft crunch somewhere behind me, not a branch falling, not a squirrel, something heavier, something that moved with care, like it was trying not to be heard. I kept walking, faster this time, pretending I didn't hear it. I didn't want to stop and turn around because stopping felt like asking for trouble, and turning around felt even worse. For a while, the sound stopped. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, maybe just a deer shifting its weight. But after another bend in the trail, I heard it again, closer, a few steps behind me, slow and cautious. I felt my chest tighten, and my breathing turned shallow. The forest suddenly felt too quiet again, except for the sound of something moving when I moved. I didn't run, but my walking turned into something fast and uneven. My backpack bounced on my shoulders. The ground under me slanted downward again, forcing me to look where I stepped. I didn't want to fall. I didn't want to look behind me either. Something inside me kept saying not to look. Eventually, the trail disappeared completely. It just dissolved into thick brush and fallen branches. I stopped, panting, staring at a mess of tangled plants that didn't look like any trail at all. My stomach dropped. I didn't know how I'd wandered so far off the path, but there was no way the trail continued through that. I slowly turned around, finally forcing myself to check behind me. Nobody was there. The woods looked empty, but not peaceful. More like they were holding something very still. My heart didn't slow down. If anything, seeing nothing made me feel worse. It meant whatever was moving back there was staying out of sight on purpose. I decided to head uphill, figuring it would eventually push me toward a ridge or a clearer area. My legs burned as I climbed the slope. My boots slipped on patches of wet leaves, and a few times I grabbed at roots just to keep from falling backward. The forest kept getting darker as the sun sank. My shirt stuck to my back with cold sweat. I heard my heartbeat louder than anything else. Halfway up the slope, I found something that made my blood run cold. Footprints. Not old ones, fresh ones. Deep, heavy prints in the soft soil, like someone had climbed the same hill not long before me. The steps were large, spaced far apart, and they didn't look like hiking boot treads. They looked more like worn-down work boots, the kind of person who moves around the woods often might wear. They led uphill in the same direction I was going. But what scared me wasn't the size or the depth. It was how each step pointed slightly sideways, like whoever made them kept glancing over their shoulder while moving, like they were looking behind them the entire time. A sharp, cold wave spread through my chest as I stared at those prints. Someone had been running from something, running uphill the same way I was now, running toward nothing but thicker forest. I followed the prints because I had no choice. The ground was still easier to walk on where they had pressed down the leaves. I climbed until my legs felt weak. The forest grew dimmer with every step. The air turned colder. The smell of metal lingered. Then, from somewhere far behind me, I heard the faintest sound again. A slow step, a controlled shift of weight. It felt confident now, as if whatever had been following me knew I was tired, knew I couldn't go much faster. That was when panic finally hit me full force. I didn't think anymore. I just pushed my legs as hard as I could. My thighs burned. My lungs ached. The branches scratched my arms as I shoved through them. I didn't stop to listen. I didn't stop to breathe. All I wanted was to get higher, to reach open ground, any place where I wasn't trapped between trees. It felt like forever before the slope leveled out. My vision blurred from the strain. The cold air sliced my throat with every breath. But then I saw something, an old wooden hunting stand above the hill, half broken but still standing. It wasn't much, but it meant people had been here once. And behind it, past the line of trees, I saw something even better. A thin strip of open land with tall grass, a sign that the forest edge was close. I forced myself toward it. My legs shook so badly that every step felt like my knees would buckle. When I finally stepped out of the trees and onto the open strip, The last bit of daylight hit my face. Felt unreal, like stepping out of another world. Once I was in the open, I turned around for the first time with nothing blocking my view. The tree line was still, silent, black between the trunks. Nothing moved, nothing shifted, but I knew for a fact something was inside that darkness. Something that had followed me for over an hour without showing itself. Something that stayed close enough to hear me breathe, but far enough to never be seen. I didn't wait any longer. I kept walking along the open strip until I reached the gravel path near the road. When I finally saw my car, my whole body felt weak, like it had held tension for so long that it didn't know how to relax. I drove home with my hands shaking on the wheel. I kept checking the mirror even though I knew nothing would be there. But the feeling stayed with me. The woods had been too quiet for too long. The steps behind me had matched mine too closely. The footprints I found were too fresh. Someone else was in those woods with me. Someone who didn't want to be seen and knew exactly how to move without being caught. And the worst part is this: I don't think I was the first person they followed. And I don't think I'll be the last. I didn't plan on hiking far that day. I only wanted a quiet walk to clear my head after a long week. There was a small forest a few miles from where I lived. A place people said was peaceful but easy to get turned around in. I had been in it a few times before, but only on the main trail. That afternoon, I decided to explore one of the side paths I had never taken. I told myself I'd only follow it for a little while and then turn back before sunset. The air was cool when I stepped into the woods. The sky was cloudy enough that the light came through in a soft gray shade, making the leaves on the ground look pale and flat. The branches overhead formed loose arches that made the trail look like a quiet tunnel. The dirt was soft, damp from rain earlier in the week. Everything smelled like wet bark and old earth. Felt calm in a way I needed. The trail at first was simple, wide enough for two people to walk side by side, with clear boot marks from hikers who had passed through recently. I felt relaxed, taking long steps, listening only to the soft crunch of leaves under my shoes. After 10 minutes, the path curved left and thinned out. The trees grew closer together. Ivy wrapped around trunks. Thin branches hung lower. The air felt cooler, but it still didn't feel dangerous, not yet. After 15 or 20 minutes, I came across the fork. There were no signs, no markings, just a narrow path breaking off the main one. It looked barely used, maybe even forgotten. Something about it felt different from the neat trails I was used to. The leaves on it didn't look disturbed. The opening between the trees was thin, almost like the forest didn't want people heading that way. But I was curious, and curiosity always gets you deeper than you plan. I followed it, telling myself I'd only go a few minutes. Right away, the ground changed. It became uneven, with roots sticking out at odd angles. Moss covered some patches and made them slippery. The trees shifted from tall and spaced out to shorter and packed together. Branches scraped my jacket as I moved through. I remember thinking how strange it was that such a different part of the forest existed just a few steps from the main path. As I walked deeper, the sounds around me changed too. The wind seemed quieter. The usual calls of birds faded. Even the distant hum of traffic disappeared. It felt like the forest swallowed all noise. The silence grew thick enough that I could hear my own heartbeat. That was the first moment I felt something like unease, a small pressure in my chest. The trail curved so sharply that I lost sight of where I came from. When I looked back, all I saw were trees, no path, no opening, nothing that looked like a way out. It made me tense, but I told myself not to panic. I kept going, hoping the trail would loop back around. But it didn't. Instead, it pulled me deeper until the trees became so close together that I had to push through them. Their trunks were thin but packed tight. The ground dropped sharply, forcing me to brace myself with my hands as I moved downhill. The dirt was soft and wet, sticking to my palms. After a while, I smelled something sharp behind the usual forest scent. A faint metallic smell, like rust or cold iron. It didn't belong there, and I tried not to focus on it. I reached the bottom of the slope and paused to catch my breath. The silence around me grew heavier, almost unnatural. I could hear water dripping somewhere, but nothing else. As I stood there, I heard a faint sound behind me, a soft crack, something stepping on leaves. Not fast, not loud, just enough to instantly freeze every muscle in my body. I didn't turn around. I just stood there, listening, trying to breathe quietly. After a few seconds, the sound stopped. The silence felt deeper again. My heart hammered so hard I thought whatever was behind me would hear it. I forced myself to keep walking, moving faster now. Every now and then, I heard something again. The same kind of sound, a single step, then silence. Sometimes it felt slightly left of me, then behind me again. Always at a distance, but not far. The steps were slow and careful, like someone trying not to be heard but messing up just a little. I didn't speak. I didn't call out. I knew that would make things worse. I just kept moving, following the trail even though it grew narrower with each step. My throat felt dry. My hands were shaking slightly. I kept telling myself it was an animal, but I had been in the woods enough times to know animal movements had a rhythm. This didn't. This felt controlled, intentional. I sped up, practically pushing aside branches now. My jacket caught on thorns. Leaves slapped against my face. The trail grew so faint that at times I wasn't sure I was even on one anymore. I glanced back once, just once, and saw nothing. But the trees looked darker behind me, like an extra layer of shadow hung there. As I walked downhill again, the smell of metal grew stronger. I saw footprints in the mud, large ones, deep ones, not mine. They looked recent. The edges hadn't softened from rain or wind. They pointed the same direction I was walking, but they were spread unevenly, like the person who made them had been running or stumbling. My stomach tightened. I didn't want to think about why someone would run down this abandoned part of the woods. The trail bent again and led me to a narrow, dried creek bed. Stepping into it made the sound of my footsteps echo faintly, bouncing off the tall banks on either side. I hated that. It made me feel exposed. I hurried along it, hoping it would lead somewhere open. Behind me, I heard another step, this time slower, closer. My heartbeat grew loud enough to drown out the forest. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see anything. I carried on, almost slipping on smooth rocks. The creek bed curved sharply, and when I rounded it, I saw something that made my breath catch. A piece of old fabric stuck on a branch. Dark blue, torn, maybe from a jacket. I didn't touch it. I didn't want to know how long it had been there or who left it. Then the creek bed rose, and I climbed out of it, using my hands to pull myself up. The forest on the other side was slightly brighter. The trees spread out more. I could see patches of sky. That small bit of light gave me enough hope to walk faster, even though my legs felt weak. Eventually, I saw something man-made. An old wooden fence, half-rotten but still standing. It ran along the edge of the forest. Beyond it, I saw open land, grass, a dirt road, and the faint outline of houses far in the distance. Relief hit me so hard that I had to steady myself on a tree. I pushed myself toward the fence, climbed over it, and stepped into the open air. My body felt lighter the moment I left the trees. I turned back, looking at the dark space between the trunks. Nothing moved. Nothing stepped out. But the feeling, that heavy pressure on the back of my neck, didn't fade. I knew something had been there, something that followed me but stayed hidden, something that knew those woods better than I ever could. I walked across the field until I reached the road. Only then did I let myself breathe normally again. My clothes were dirty, my hands scraped, my legs aching, but I kept walking. I didn't look back again. When I finally reached my car, the sun was almost gone, leaving the sky a dull gray. I sat in the driver's seat for a long time before I even started the engine. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. The forest looked quiet from the outside. Normal, safe. But I knew the truth now. Someone else was in there. Someone who knew how to move without being seen. Someone who didn't rush, didn't panic, didn't make mistakes. And the only reason I'm able to write this now is because I reached the edge of the woods before they did. I still think about the sound of those steps sometimes. Slow, patient, always behind me. And I know for a fact that I'm never walking into those woods alone again.